We're ending on a high. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mitch Benn.
Right, don't really know what you want to talk about.
Anything.
I wrote this.
Yes.
Who's read this? About 3 of you. That's cool. That's good. No, that's good. It's good, you know, because that means actually I've brought some. So if you'd all read it already, that would have been a bit pointless, really, wouldn't it? Okay. Okay, I'll show a hand. That's a big idea who I am from various other things. Oh, that's good. That's lovely. If people know me from anything, they tend to know me from the Now Show, which is this Radio 4 satirical show I've been doing since the war.
Which one?
I can't even let it at the time. Really. The one that nobody's ever seen yet. No, I've been doing that for a hell of a long time. But I've been a big science fiction nerd since I was a kid. Always have been. It's kind of my sort of principle abiding passion. Mainly, I guess. Through you know, well, for everybody in my generation, Doctor Who was the sci-fi entry drug, wasn't it? It was the sci-fi game. And I remember being sort of, I was born in 1970, so I was born between episodes 3 and 4 of Spirit from Space. I love talking to people who know what the fuck I'm on about. That's very unusual. Tried dropping a glowing reference to Orson Scott Card at Jongleurs, Watford, and see where it gets. But basically, I sort of grew up. I have dim memories of John Pertwee. My dad wasn't a massive John Pertwee fan. My dad kind of got me into science fiction. He wasn't a massive fan. Didn't mind John Pertwee, didn't much care for what the show became during that era. This sort of slightly kind of cheap-ass, straight-to-video Avengers knockoff that it was for certainly the first 3 or 4 years. Again, I think the reason he fell in love with Doctor Who is kind of the reason we all fall in love with Doctor Who, which is just the unbelievable freewheeling format, and it just seemed a bit of a shame for one reason or another to kind of strand him in the home counties for 3 years. And then when Tom took over and fired up the TARDIS again, he kind of got back into it. So while I have dim kind of memories of catching glimpses of John Pertwee, but that kind of sat me down in front of the first Tom Baker series and said, here you go, we're off again. And I think the first one I actually watched all the way through was Genesis of the Daleks, and I was 4, which is extraordinary when you think about it. It's not really something you want to sit a 4-year-old down in front of. It's basically this massive genocide metaphor. But you know, and since then I've never missed it. I banged the drum very loudly for it during the Wilderness years. One of the great things, we all saw the little mini-sode the other day. Yes. One of the thing was particularly landmark that, not just getting a chance to see Paul being the Doctor on screen again for another 6 minutes, because he was only the Doctor on screen for about 12 minutes the first time, really. You know, between it being Sylvester and then the sort of the 20 minutes amnesia, he only really got to do about 10 minutes of doctoring during the TV movie. But one of the things that was particularly great, I thought, was him giving a little shout out to all his Big Finish companions, because I thought that was really a nice way of sort of acknowledging that it was Big Finish probably more than anything else that kind of, you know, kept the flame burning, if they want to kick the calm metaphor to its logical conclusion during the Wilderness years, you know. And I remember, I think the first sci-fi con I played, it wasn't specifically sci-fi, it was Cult TV in '99, which is in the depths of the Wilderness years, if you like, because you'd had the TV movie and that had gone nowhere, and there was just no way it was ever coming back at the end of the night. It was just no, they'd revived it and the revival had failed, and that's how you know something is dead, you know. So there's just no bloody words. I don't know about you, but when they actually announced this just over 10 years ago, at the end of 2003, when they announced that they were going to start a new series again, I don't know about you, but I'm believing. Because, yeah, literally, you're going to have... Yep.
Yeah, when I heard BBC Wales was going to put it on, I thought, oh my God, they're going to cast Max Boyce as the...
Well, no, you say that, but the weird thing was actually that was always part of the thing is that when it was away, you know, a lot of the popular memory had kind of classed it almost as light end, and that's why when the rumours that it was going to be revived came out, because I'd like somebody at some point, I think DWM did something a bit like this, compile a sort of a complete list of the false dawns of Doctor Who. Because when it was actually announced in 2002 it was coming back, I didn't actually believe it, because I don't know if you remember, but for the 16 years or so it was off the air, literally about once every 6 months it was announced with a degree of confidence that it was coming back. Either, you know, it was going to be a new series made in the States, a new series made here, or a movie starring Gary Oldman, or a new series, you know what I mean? And that just kept getting, so when it was actually officially, Lorraine Eggers officially announced it over 10 years ago, I was just like, yeah, whatever. I didn't actually, and of course actually something which added to the confusion is it came up more or less bang on top of Scream of the Shalka, going online, you know, the online animation that Paul wrote. So I think a lot of people, when that came up, just thought, no, you got that wrong, mate, it's a web cartoon. You know, I think a lot of people thought that when the report went, oh, there's going to be a new season, and no, there isn't. It's a web cartoon. You got the wrong end of the stick, you know. So when you actually read the, oh, okay, really is a new series, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I remember that day. We're on our way into work, listening to the radio in the car when
Right.
they announced it. And we got to work, and I saw a fellow Doctor Who fan of ours, friend Steve, walking into work, and I yelled across the car park to him, "It's coming back, and they're giving it to Russell T Davies!"
Yes. Yeah. Well, Russell kind of had them over a barrel because basically ever since Queer spoke, the BBC have been on at him to write something for him, and apparently he basically said, dig up Doctor Who and we'll talk, otherwise forget it.
Yeah,
That was,
price tag.
that was literally his, you know, the only thing I'm interested in writing for the BBC is Doctor Who. That was apparently his kind of his ultimatum. I think what the main problem was, it was actually something to do with, because there was always this idea that we're going to make a movie of it, the rights are sort of floating around within the BBC, and Worldwide had a big chunk of it, and actually, for a while, BBC TV didn't actually have the rights to make any more. And I think it was eventually Lorraine Hegarty basically said, look, this is bloody ridiculous. It's web cartoons, it's audio, because Big Finish had been licensed by then, it's audio adventures, it's web cartoons, it's books, it's extended universe books, it's all of it. The one thing it bloody isn't is the one thing it's supposed to be, which is on the telly on Saturday night. That's the one place it isn't, you know. And eventually, yeah, I think she eventually said to Worldwide, I think, look, just shit or get off the pot. You know what I mean? And I made the bloody movie, or give us the rights back so we can put this bloody thing back on TV, because there's obviously a demand for it, you know. But I was at this convention in '99, and I gave a little sort of panel thing like this, so it's a bit of a limited panel, it's just me. And I actually said that the main tragedy of Doctor Who being off as long as it was, is that while it was on, the TV industry had a degree of faith in the imagination of the audience, to the extent where stuff would happen like, Dalek Terry's got this idea about 90% of the human race being wiped out by the influenza virus. Really sounds a bit grim, but it's Dalek Terry. Okay, right, you know, let's see the script, let's give it a go. So you get survivors, you know what I mean? Or Dalek Terry's on about doing Robin Hood in space. Sounds a bit ropey, let's have a look. So you get Blake Seven. And even over on ITV you get PJ's going on about sort of detectives who are actually chemical elements sorting out wrinkles of the space. I didn't understand a pigging word of that. Is it anything like Doctor Who? Well, it looks a bit like, all right, that's it, you know what I mean? So, you got to remember about Sapphire and Steel, it was on ITV at 8:30. It was as mainstream in terms of the way it was programmed as it's possible to get, and you watch it now and it fries your cortex. It really does. It's the most sort of cerebral thing that's ever been on British TV, and it was on ITV at 8:30. It was on in the bloody Family Fortune slot. So while Doctor Who existed on a Saturday afternoon, there was this idea that the public at large have a way into all this, and then when Doctor Who goes at the end of the 80s, you literally get 15 straight years of coppers and hospitals. 15 straight years of coppers and hospitals. So, you know, what's it about? Oh, it sounds a bit weird. No, they'll never end it. You know, and the TV industry completely lost faith in its audience's imagination. No, they won't like that. It's weird. They won't like it. You know, and when it's restored to its rightful place in, you know, British cultural existence, suddenly you get stuff like Life on Mars and Ashes to Ashes. You know what I mean? So you start getting stuff like that. And I always said, you know, that if you put it back and did it right, then they would start going, what was it going to say? If they can handle Doctor Who, they can probably handle this. You know, and that seems to have been the effect that it's having, is that just generally, you know, okay, Robin Hood was ditchwater, but you know. But you get Merlin, all right, Merlin, I was in Merlin for about 30 seconds. So I got 2 lines and an arg. I was in there. The funny thing is, it was so dimly lit, even people who know me for years didn't even notice it was me. The day after my episode was on, they announced that was the last season. It's like, great, I broke Merlin. I'm in it for 30 seconds, and the BBC goes, okay, get rid of this. So yeah, I was in Merlin for about 35 seconds. Well, you know, Merlin, okay, I mean, it was you know, many respects it was bloody cheesy, but they had this massive international following, and it was, you know, proper Swords and Dragons high fantasy being stuck on at 6 p.m. on it, you know, and it's, because I remember, you know, when they would occasionally, in the Wilderness years, you would occasionally get an attempt at a British genre series. It was almost like the TV was in back. Do you remember Ultraviolet? Remember that was down at like 1 a.m. on Channel 4 with like no PR whatsoever. Oh shit, we've accidentally made a vampire show. We'll stick it there when nobody notices. Do you know what I mean? We go, otherwise we'll look like nerds. So stick the vampire, yes. So
How about
Strange, the series that should have happened but didn't.
Strange is the one that you call. I didn't see
Yeah.
much of that. Yeah, I didn't actually see much of that. One of the things you've got to bear in mind is that I work of an evening, so actually I don't actually get to see an awful lot of TV unless I make a very specific effort. Also, at the time, as possibly being slightly unfair, it kind of looked like yet another X-Files knockoff when I had a real gutful of X-Files knockoffs. By the mid-90s, by the end of the 90s, I'd really had it with X-Files knockoffs because that when they think, well, actually, American genre TV kind of goes through that phase where they only seem to be able to make one show at any given time. And for years it was Trek. For mainly the whole of the 80s and then the first half of the 90s, all they could make was Trek, or very, very slight variations on Trek. I remember all these things, talking about Babylon 5 like it was the antithesis of Trek. It's a very minor variation upon Trek, you know what I mean? Similarly, Stargate. Stargate is just Trek set now, but it's still Trek, you know what I mean? Yes?
Did you ever get to see a program called Lex?
I saw a bit of Lex. Lex, that was the weird thing. I would say Lex was part of another genre, which was the one human and bunch of aliens on a gangly spaceship.
What Lex was about was, because I'm a big fan, I love to go and see the physical studios and everything in Halifax. It was everything that Star Trek wasn't. It was giant, very phallic-looking bunkers about the size of Manhattan. Had Stanley Tweedle as escapee, Kai, an alive dead assassin, Zed, a very sexy, half-sexy person.
I remember they recast after season 1.
Sweary robots,
But my feeling about Lex was that seemed to belong to another little subgenre, which was sort of the bunch of weirdos on a spaceship. Because you had Lex about the same time you had Farscape, about the same time you had Andromeda, about the same time, you know what I mean?
So it was a rip-off of Lex.
Yeah, it was. It managed to be up the sort of the bunch of weirdos on the spaceship was another thing that suddenly everybody was making. Right now, they're making the disparate band of survivors. That's all that, and there's about 6 or 7 of them. Now the way you can tell is they've all got the same bloody poster. If you look, the poster for Falling Skies is the same as the poster for Revolution, which is the same as the poster for whatever that one, Defiance. It's all a bunch of people, all varying degrees of fun. Yeah, the lead, with one guy at the front, a bit unshaven, wearing a brown leather jacket, standing in front of a ruined landscape like this. You Google the posters, they only make the one show at any given time. Right now, they're all making that show. At the end of the 90s, they were all making Farscape, and for most of the 90s, they were all making the X-Files. It was a guy in a suit versus UFOs. There's about 6 or 7, they did that one, Dark Skies, was the X-Files set in the 60s. And then they did that one where they're out of Will and Grace, except they weren't aliens, it was super evolved humans. So they did, but it's all guy in a suit versus conspiracy theory, But I possibly didn't give Strange a fair crack of the whip because when that came out, I thought that looks like another X-Files knockoff. But,
so, do you think? Because I loosely belong to what's titled the Men from ITC.
Righto.
So we've got the Champions, the Avengers. I also grew up on Jerry Anderson, which I've never given tribute and proper thing, decent that it
very possibly not in wider circles. I think within the genre circles.
But the question is, when we look at ITV now, is it beyond redemption with just X crap factor? Is there any hope for imagination back on ITV?
Not until they get the account of all the water.
Well, very possibly, I mean, they had Primeval, does that count?
No.
No, that's just boring.
Primeval.
What's that?
Primeval.
Primeval, is that what it was referred to in genre circles? I honestly don't know. I think one of the things that you do have, and this is one of the reasons I do bang the drum for the BBC quite a bit, is that there is, and I say this as somebody who's worked with the BBC on and off for 15 years now, is that there is a definite difference of culture, which is that the BBC knows at a kind of a molecular level that it's not about the bottom line, that it's actually about, that there are certain pressures that it is, what's the word I'm looking for, exempt from. That, it can't be seen to be merely pissing money away, as it occasionally is, and then, things break out, like all these people giving these golden elbows, when they're being essentially fired for incompetence, but given £6 million on the way out anyway, or whatever it was. That doesn't help, but, while it can't be seen to be pissing money away, it isn't a commercial organisation, it isn't under the same pressures commercial organisations are. ITV's main trouble, as far as I'm concerned, is as soon as they find something that works, they kick it to death. Do you remember Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I used to do a radio show for Cellular, I used to make Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. ITV suddenly found it had a massive mainstream primetime hit with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So instantly they stuck it on for 2 hours a night, 5 nights a week. And killed it in about 2 years. Because everybody's got sick to death of the bloody thing. Whereas if it had been on once a week, it would have been on forever. But it's like, ooh, they like this, put it on all the time! You know what I mean? It's like the X Factor. The X Factor used to be on a Saturday night, it now takes up a whole fucking weekend.
But
You know what I mean?
It's then at the same point, the BBC guilty of the same thing with newspapers.
Yeah, but to a lesser extent. I mean, like, you know, I would say, the thing is, I mean, I don't know, but I really do these things. But I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know how many nights a week is EastEnders on now, I genuinely don't.
20.
Well, yes, it's like so I genuinely don't know. But I think, you know, that, yes.
I think the social should be on their own channel because we've got East, Chorus, Nation Street, Farm, Enders, City.
So mix them all together.
Yeah.
I was in the middle of working towards a point I did and I can't actually remember what it was. Yeah, go on.
Without the soap operas, we wouldn't have had Sapphire and Steel.
Without the soap operas, you wouldn't have had Sapphire and
Emmerdale
Steel.
needed 6 weeks off for holidays, so they had to put something.
Is that literally
It
what it
really
was?
is true.
Well, there you go. That's brilliant. Yeah. And ultimately, you know, I mean, these things, they keep it all ticking over. And, you know, there are people who started off writing on that kind of thing, and ended up, you know, it's, yeah, I mean, I don't know, so I suppose next thing to talk about is how I ended up writing this. Right. I've got two little girls. They are 5 and 8. Big one turned 8 a couple of days ago. And so, as you can imagine, I spent quite a lot of time, up to and including quite recently, reading out stories at night. In particular, those kind of big format, big flappy kind of A4 kids picture books, you know, like big A4 illustrations with the words just dotted about them. And some of them obviously are brilliant. I mean, everybody knows about Julia Donaldson, and Julia Donaldson obviously is great. Everybody raves about the Gruffalo. My favourite is one called Snail and the Whale. It's got this beautiful rolling beat to it anyway. And so, some of them are great. Some of them, quite frankly, are ropey as all fuck. And I remember thinking, I bet I could write one of these, because essentially they're just long form poems, and I'm a songwriter, and songs and poems and tunes. So I thought, I wonder if I could write one of these. So I did about 3 or 4 years ago. I wrote one, apropos of nothing. I probably may yet do something with it. Obviously, it's only about 12 pages long, as these things always are. It's just basically a long verse form poem, verse form story. But having written it, I suddenly thought to myself, ooh, I've just remembered how much I used to enjoy writing stories. Because weirdly, I mean, I've done all kinds of things over the years. And I always thought until recently that what I really wanted to be when I was a kid was a proper actor. And I kind of did. That was certainly what I put my effort into at university. I was basically, you know, head of a university, supposedly doing Spanish and French, basically just spending my time in the theatre. And I suddenly remembered, wait a minute, when I was a kid, when I was actually little, what I used to do was write stories. And I won prizes for it at primary school. I won a couple of little prizes for like short story and long form verse writing when I was at primary school. And then when I went to grammar school, it was kind of not really about writing your own stuff. It was about kind of dissecting other people's. So I kind of got out the habit of writing stories. And then I just remembered, this is kind of what I was into first time around. And I was kind of thinking about, I often have conversations with friends of mine who are like students of the classics and everything. And this whole thing about there are only 6 stories. There's actually about 12, but there aren't very many. And one of my favourite memes, if you like, is the lost baby. Is, you know, the baby transported or transplanted by some weird happenstance or another into some completely alien environment where it grows up with either hilarious or rip-snorting or heartbreaking consequences. And, you know, this goes all the way to, I mean, it goes all the way at least as far back as Moses. I'm sure anybody properly versed in the classics would tell us what was being plagiarized for Moses. But it goes all the way through popular fiction. Obviously, you know, Mowgli and Tarzan, basically the same kind of idea. Superman, Will Ferrell's Elf. What's that?
Carrot from the Discworld books.
Yes, Carrot from the Discworld books with the only non-magic sword in Discworld, yes. But I remember thinking, and then, of course, I've been really good pals with Neil Gaiman for about 8 years, and Neil sent me a PDF of The Graveyard Book about 6 months before it came out. Yes. And I thought, oh, Neil wrote one. Because even the title of The Graveyard Book is an obvious nod to the Jungle Book. You know, there's, you know, human baby lost in the jungle, raised by the beast, human baby lost in the graveyard, raised by the ghost. And I just started thinking, this story pops up everywhere. I thought, what would this story be if it was a sci-fi book? What would that story be? And I thought, human baby abducted by a UFO, grows up on another planet. That's lovely. Why is nobody writing that? So quick Google, it doesn't look like anybody is writing that. Or if they're writing it somewhere where Google can't find it. Right, I'm writing that. And I started tinkering with it. For about the first 18 months, I just tinkered with it with no particular end in sight. I just started hammering this thing together in my spare. I actually wrote quite a bit of it on my phone. I've got a little Word app on my phone, and I would occasionally just crank out a paragraph on a bus. Because I wrote the whole thing completely out of sequence. I don't know if this is what you're meant to do or what you're absolutely not meant to do, but I have the story in my head as like a sequence of events, and every time one of the events kind of swam into focus, I just wrote it down. On the I mean, you couldn't have done this longhand. It'd be impossible to do it longhand. Well, you could be, it'd be an almighty pain in the arse. But because this is all electronic, I think, right, I'll just write the events in the order that I kind of see them, and then if something I write which goes earlier in the book has some bearing on something I've already written which happens later, I can just change that, you know, and so that's what I did. And so after about a year or so tinkering on this thing with no particular end in sight, I'd written basically the whole of the beginning, the whole of the end, and quite a few bits in the middle. And then this thing happened, which is kind of passing into publishing legend. It was in July 2011. My eldest, Greta, has just turned 8. She was like 5 3/4, and her passport was about to run out, because the baby passports only last for 5 years. So I needed to get her a new passport, and there's a way of doing it where you go into the passport office in the morning, and it costs about an extra 30 quid, but you actually get the passport at the end of the day. And if you take the day off and you've got the 30 quid, it's so bloody worth it, because at the end of the day you're holding the damn thing. You know, you don't wait for it to turn up as watching the calendar as the date your holiday gets closer. Or then they turn up and you're supposed to sign for it and you're not there, so you get a bit of red card and you have to go and get it from some depot in Southwark that's open for like 8 minutes a day. At the end of the day you're actually holding the bastard thing. So I went in, had my appointment at 11:30, handed over everything, gave them all the money. Got a bit of paper saying, come back and get it at 3:30. So okay. I had nothing to do, and the thing is, where I live, it takes about an hour and a half to get home, so there's no point going home. So by the time I sit down, I'll have to get up again. So I get on Twitter, and at the time I had about 20,000 followers, I've got about 40,000 now. And I went, hey guys, stuck in town for 4 hours, anybody got any thoughts on what am I doing myself? Bing. And people start saying, oh, go and have lunch at this place, or go and see this exhibition. Gallant Publishing say, come and talk to us about writing a book. And so I replied, right, oh, you're probably joking, but I've Googled you and you're in St Martin's Lane, I'll see you in 20 minutes, that'll teach you. And I went round to a Lion House in St Martin's Lane and I walked up to the front desk and I said, I don't know who I'm here to see, but if you find out who does Gallance's Twitter feed and tell them Mitch Benn's turned up, we'll see what happens, right? And so down the stairs came Simon Spanton, who's the Deputy Commissioning Editor at Gallance, and the thing is, he knows me off the radio. And he knows that I'm a big science fiction nerd, because that's kind of the joke about me on the Now Show. You know, John's tiny, Marcus is posh and angry, I never shut up about Doctor Who. That's kind of the gag about me, you know. And so he says, well, look, I know you're into this, because Gallance is the sci-fi and fantasy branch of Orion Books. And he said, look, I know you're into this stuff. And I know you write things. You know, I know you write sketches and so on. I'm just wondering if, well, as in actors, mate, you know, I've already got the beginnings of this, you know, it's not really a kid science fiction, it's kind of a kid-friendly science fiction book is how I describe it. And so we just started talking, and it took like about, 6 months of meetings and me emailing in chapters and then emailing me notes, and then we finally signed the deal at like Christmas 2011, and that's when I finally saw what the deadline was, and oh shit. The deadline for first draft was April 1st, and I'm thinking, right, and it's now Christmas, and I'm touring with my band and doing the Now Show for the whole of February and March. Right, and I said to my wife, Clara, does your uncle still own that barn in the Peak District? She says, yeah. I said, do you think he'd lend it to me for like most of January? And so that's what I did, I just disappeared off up into the hills. Very nearly got snowed in, it was all a bit misery at the end of it, it was all a bit Stephen King. And I basically hid out in this barn in the middle of nowhere in the Peak District. And so having been tinkering with the book for about 2.5 years by this point, actually, most of it was written in this single 2-week burst of activity in January 2012. And so that went in, finally came out in July. I've already written the sequel. I wrote the first draft of the sequel, basically the same deal in January back in this cabin. But I've just sent the second, I think, final draft of that in. So now the plan is that this will come out in paperback in, I think, March or April, and the second one will come out in July. So, and it's the response has been fantastic. I mean, the sales have been okay as far as I can tell. The reviews are amazing, and what was particularly good about the reviews was where they were. Because I'm sure one thing which really pisses us all off as science fiction fans is when science fiction won't admit that it's science fiction. You know, it's not science fiction, it's speculative prose. Dude, it's science fiction, it's set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, your hero's a robot. Yeah, but it's not science fiction. because there's no spaceship. You know, it's fucking sad. Part of the reason with that is, particularly in literary circles, the fear is, the minute you nail your colours to the sci-fi mast, suddenly nobody who isn't an avowed fan of sci-fi will read it, and literally nobody will review it. Outside of a little SF ghetto which consists of 2 magazines and half a dozen blogs. Literally nobody will review it. One of the things that we were kind of keen for this is because I've got a bit of profile out with the genre and everything, is we were trying, one of the things I think we pulled off is we haven't nailed this book's colours to anything, really. And well, actually that was kind of borne out in the reviews. Everybody reviews it as something else. I've seen some people review it as a kid's book. And it works for kids. I didn't write it as a kid's book. I've seen some people review it as a comedy, and there's jokes in it, but I didn't write it as a comedy. You know, I've seen, you know, and that's great. That's great. Everybody's reading into it whatever they want it to be, which it's lovely. But the great thing is, it's not just that we got really good reviews in the Times and the Sunday Independent. It's the fact that we got reviews in the Times and the Sunday Independent. People who, you know, out with that little sci-fi ghetto actually talking about this. So that's good. Shall I read a bit?
Yes.
Okay, we will read a bit. Broadly speaking, now those of you who haven't read it, I've already kind of told you what the actual premise is. Little human girl is kind of inadvertently abandoned by her parents during a UFO incident. And the occupant of the UFO, who's an alien biologist called Lubbock. There are no vowels in the alien language. That's one of the complaints that people have, is it's not an easy book to read out.
What to this reading?
Well, there you go. Yeah, well, actually, that's one of the reasons I did the audio book. So people, I mean, the thing is, you know, I don't mind if people pronounce them their own way. I mean, obviously, I've got a way in mind to pronounce it, but you know, I'm a great believer in this thing that once a work of art is finished, it's no longer in any way up to the artist what it's about. I think it becomes, you know, it becomes very much whatever, you know, the reader or the viewer wants it to be. This alien biologist called Lubbock basically takes her home, and after a brief bit of legal hassle, adopts her and raises her as his own on this alien planet. This is about, I guess, about a third of the way in. She's had a very rough day at school. Something goes wrong at school, and she gets given a couple of days off. And Lubbock, her adopted father, being a biologist, has taken her to this nature reserve, which is her favourite spot on the planet. So read this. The nature reserves along the coast of Riffic had been Tara's favourite place on Mullimal ever since Lubbock had first taken her there at just 3 orbits old. Lubbock had watched, beaming with pride, as the tiny human girl had capered through the forest and along the shore, agog with fascination at the plants and wildlife. How gratifying that she should share his love of nature. A parent always hopes that their children will share their passions, but it's by no means a certainty that they will. This is doubly true of adopted children, and several thousandly true of adopted children from different planets. Lubbock had made a point of taking Tara to Riffic at least once in orbit ever since, several times in orbit if work and other commitments permitted. The place had many guises, all beautiful in their own way. During the hot season, towering tree-sized flowers and delicate flower-sized trees would be in full bloom, a festival of colour around which bird-sized insects and insect-sized birds would buzz and flutter. During the cooling season, the foliage would turn a deep blue as it dried and fell, forming great cushiony piles, which Lubbock would expressly forbid Tara to jump into, before joining her in jumping into them. During the cold season, icicles and frost would decorate the land and vegetation like glittering baubles, which Tara found curiously moving for reasons neither she nor Lubbock could guess at. During the warming season, the tree-sized flowers would punch their way through the ice like deceased warriors of legend, resurrected by their ancient gods to fight another battle. It was all especially fascinating because the climate within the city had been artificially controlled since eras past, so one had to venture out into nature in order to experience weather at all. That morning, Tara had set her sleep well to wake her early and had Lubbock's configuration 11 ready for him by the time we woke up. They had made up a bag of food, slices of configuration 9, it tasted better cold than the other configurations, some wish rolls, British paste, and a flask of hot zuff. They fitted their gravity bubbles. Did you remember to charge your bubble? Yes, I remember to charge my bubble. And packed spare power cells. It was almost a whole cell's journey to Riffic. They set off just as everyone else was floating to work and study. Lubbock and Tara exchanged mischievous grins as they floated off in the opposite direction to the flow of traffic. No work for them today. The sun was high in the sky by the time they arrived. They sat down on the beach, a stretch of crystal sand, which refracted the light in rainbow patterns along its length. The sea reflecting the sky was a deep pink. Terra gazed out toward the horizon and breathed deeply. All thoughts of interfaces, Gushka's practice, and singed hair cleansed from the mind. Wonderful, isn't it? Said Libbok. It is. It is indeed, replied Terra. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking it all in. Libbok, asked Terra, what's Earth like? There was a heavy pause. Well, said Libbok, a lot of it is very beautiful. As beautiful as this? Some of it's pretty close, yes, said Libbok. At least it was the last time I was there. How do you mean? It's the humans. They're not as careful as they could be with regard to their planet, said Libbok, choosing his words with care. He knew that the way humans were perceived by Throns, primitive, savage, stupid even, had become a difficult topic for Terra, and this interface business hadn't helped one bit. He didn't want to make matters worse by launching into some bitter diatribe about humans despoiling their homeworld. He got most of that out of his system many orbits ago, he recalled with a shudder. Is there hope for the humans? Terra asked, with genuine curiosity. There's always hope, replied Libbok, after a moment's thought. Culturally and technologically, they're about where we were 5 or 6 years ago, and we turned out all right. Mind you, we've never developed the sort of weapons they have on Earth now. Weapons? Weapons that can destroy a whole city in one go, said Libbok. They've actually used the things too. I've seen pictures. No, you can't see them. It would scare you out your wits. They've made enough of these weapons to kill everyone on Earth several times over. Why? Asked Terra, distressed. Who knows? By the time they'd set off the first few, there'd be nobody left to set off the rest. There doesn't seem to be much logic to it. And given that they seem to be willing to go to war over the tiniest thing, minor tribal variations, ancient superstitions, even differing economic theories, if you can believe that, it seems pretty inevitable that they'll wipe each other out sooner or later. That's assuming, said Libbok, rather hitting his stride, but they haven't done already. What? Terra was genuinely alarmed now. Well, think about it. We can see Earth from here using astroscopes and the like, but the light we're seeing left Earth many orbits ago. It could all be over on Earth already, and we wouldn't be able to tell. Terra's face fell, and Libbok suddenly realized how stupid he was being. The implication of what he just said hit him too late. He could see that it had hit Terra already. She'd come to terms with being the only human on Thnur, though it seemed to be weighing rather more heavily on it these last few days. The idea that she might actually be the last human left alive was truly disturbing. You fool, thought Libbok, letting your scientific enthusiasm run away with your mouth. You're talking to a child, not addressing a symposium. He decided to change the subject. Hungry? Starving. That's that. Yes.
I mean, you find ways of the book compared, you saying from the first, to the song you have to write the show where you've got less than 7 days?
Weirdly, I think the thing about confining myself to the barn actually weirdly reproduced the whole Now Show thing, because I find my creativity is very much dependent upon deadlines. If I've got 24 hours to do something as a matter of absolute necessity, I can do pretty much anything I need to do. If I've got all the time in the world, it just never bloody happens.
So the writing gets all done and you've got a lovely clean house.
Yeah, exactly the same. It's exactly the same thing. So basically, so oddly, it was, although I mean, it sounds like a really terrible thing to say, because I really enjoyed hiding out in the barn, getting the book done. I mean, it sounds like a dreadful admission, because it's basically me talking about how much fun it was to abandon my family. But one of the things is, I really enjoy vanishing off into my own imagination. And most of the time I do that, I'm wasting time. And just for a few days, that was my job. Vanishing off into my own imagination was actually the purpose of the exercise. And that was very enjoyable. So, anybody else? Any questions? Don't matter how black. Yes, go ahead.
Possibly the one version of the series you haven't mentioned yet is Hitchhikers.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sore point for me at the moment. Hitchhikers. Yeah.
It's a sore point for us, because at least it doesn't here. I think we're going to see on Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
Not thinking of the downside, but I mean, we saw the tour last year.
Yeah.
Only it saw it in Plymouth was highly original, because it had to be the drunkest book I've ever seen in my life.
Who was it?
Rory McGrath.
Oh God, yes, I've heard about that one. Yeah. There was some talk of Rory being somewhat the worse for wear.
I think the first time
they didn't ask him
panic
that.
didn't quite ring true.
Yeah. They didn't ask him that. But yeah, yeah, the whole Hitchhikers thing is a bit of a mess, which is a terrible shame. I can't really talk about it. Suffice it to say that all that really says.
What's it like to be?
Oh, it was great fun while it lasted. It was
How did they
terrific.
approach you first?
What's that?
How
Oh,
did
that
you
was,
get connected
well, that
with
was,
this?
well, I mean, it was Dirk Maggs I've known for years. Dirk, who adapted and produced the sort of posthumous series of the radio show, mainly works on the radio, and he used to exec produce a thing I used to do on BBC, on Radio 2 called It's Been a Bad Week. So I've known Dirk for years, and Dirk's a massive sucker. I didn't realise how big a fantasy nerd Dirk was until he showed up for work one day in a Sandman t-shirt. All right, because anybody can turn up in a Batman t-shirt. He turned up in I didn't even know he could get Sandman t-shirt. Sandman, but yeah, you're big, yeah. So obviously, you know, he just did the Radio Neverwhere, which was aces. I don't know if you heard that. It was amazing. But anyway, I was working on something with Dirk back in about February. And I said to Dirk, so what are you doing next? And he said, well, I've got this Neverwhere's got to come out. And then in the autumn, we're taking Hitchhikers on the road again. And I said, ooh, can I come and be a book? And he said, yeah, you can probably do that. And then I said, and I've no idea why I said this, I said, and hey, listen, if you ever can't get Mark, I pretty much base my entire personality on Zaphod Beeblebrox. And there's this weird moment, and Dirk went, right, are you being cute? Is that an actual suggestion? I said, well, I thought I was being cute, but you haven't got Mark, have you? And what it is Mark Wayne Davey is Professor of Drama at New York University. Yeah, that's what he does. And so they did the last tour because it was across the summer, but you couldn't do the autumn tour because it was term time. So Mark wasn't going to be in it. So, and I think they literally found that out about 48 hours previously when I had my big gob. And so, you know, a few phone calls later and I was into his Zaphod. And it was immense fun while it lasted. There were a terrific bunch of people. It is a bit galling that we've all had to sort of suck up the official version that it was cancelled due to poor ticket sales. I really can't say anything else, but suffice it to say, it didn't actually get to the stage in which poor ticket sales would have been an issue. That wasn't the problem. And for all manner of reasons, I can't really say what it was. Partly because, to be perfectly honest, I don't 100% know. I know what the situation was that arose that caused the cancellation of the tour. I have no idea how or why it arose. What's that? No. Nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. There was absolutely no ill feeling between anybody who was on the road. Everybody who was in that show, or who was working on the show, actually on the road, is still the best of friends.
So it's a bit like the National Health Service.
You're onto something there, but I can't really go into any more detail.
Having been a nurse for 22 years of that National Health, I think I can see Neil almost exactly where
I think you may be picking up on something, but like I say, I mean, I don't want to say, because anything I say, is kind of concerning matters that may yet end up coming to court. We were kind of hoping not, but it may end up coming to court. And B, actually above and beyond the raw data, which I don't really have very clearly anyway, would be pure bloody speculation on my part. So I know what the actual situation arose was the cause of cancellation of the tour. I have no idea how or why it arose, because it actually defies any kind of logic. But yeah, it's horrendous. I know there is talk of maybe trying to resurrect it again one day. It's really all a question of basically how much crap sticks to it. Do you know what I mean? Because that was the one thing we really wanted to avoid when it became apparent that, you know, it was going as wrong as it was. We did literally everything we could to try and finish the run. Even if we pretty much ended up finishing it for free. We really just wanted to end up finishing the run, because that way everything, you know, the only thing you couldn't gloss was actually having to bin it, as actually having to pull the show, because then it becomes public. And the thing is, once something has become a failed show with a big F and a big S, nobody cares why or how. It just became a failed show. So I mean, the trouble is, but I know Dirk would really love to resurrect it at some point, and I would certainly love to be a part of it if he did. I guess at least part of that would be down to Mark's availability, because part of his USP is the idea of getting the original cast together. But I would certainly love to be a part of it if Dirk ever could get it together. So the question would just be how much its reputation has been damaged by what's happened.
Yeah,
You know?
do it. I mean, who's got the rights on it? Who'd be able to do it?
Well, part of the thing is that part of the rights belong to Disney because of the movie. And that basically puts restrictions on what he can and can't do with it. But part of the plan, I think, was to try and persuade Disney to come on board with the touring version at some point, because just pointing out to them and say, look, until you decide to make the restaurant movie, which you're not going to do, essentially you're holding off a completely inert brand.
Yeah.
This brand is not doing anything for you, you know, and this is a way of actually getting it to do something for you, you know. So, but I mean, I don't know whether events of the last month are going to make that possibly less likely, or maybe more likely. I don't know. But the thing is, there is an awful lot of goodwill out there for Hitchhikers, for Douglas. You know, there's an awful lot of goodwill out there. And like I say, you know, attendances, with a couple of exceptions, were not really the problem. That wasn't really. It would ultimately have become an issue, but actually, we hadn't actually got to the stage.
It's really because it becomes such a, like, Dr. Who probably not really Doctor Who, but it becomes such a, I think particularly when you're on G2 abroad, it's become such a part of the, almost like the British folklore.
Well, you can't do comedy science fiction without being compared to it, as I've just discovered myself. But I mean, look, I'll take any comparison with Douglas above and beyond this guy's fucking kidding if he thinks he's anything like as good as Douglas. You know what I mean? But you know, because when Neil compared me to Douglas on the cover, I just thought, yes, I'll have that.
Did you pay him to write that?
No. I told Neil I was writing it, and Neil said, I'll see a draft. I don't want to see any notes, and I don't want to see any bits or a synopsis. When you've done a whole draft, I'll have a look at that. So I, except of course being Neil, it took him much longer to say. I'll speak quite maddeningly slowly. But the time I spent waiting for Neil to finish sentences. He's genuinely, I'm sure a lot of you have met him, he's genuinely the nicest guy in the world. To the point now where I just don't ask him for favours anymore, because I think basically Neil's life consists of doing favours for his less successful mates, which is everybody he knows, except Terry. But he does, you know, he's generous to a fault. But when I told him I was writing, he said, look, send me a draft. When you got a draft, I'll have a look at the draft. So I sent him the draft. In the end, I sent him the final draft. And I got that blurb back as an email. And I was looking at this blurb, is this what I think it is? I went, yes. I said, this is blurb, isn't it? I can put this on the book. Yes, that's the idea. You can put it on the book. So, you know, and I was, you know, gushing thanks for it the last time. And he said, look, here's the thing. I mean, everybody thinks I'm a very nice man, and that's true. And I'm very, you know, I try and be fair to my friends, but I've also got a reputation to consider. And if I wrote that didn't mean it, then nobody would ever take anything I said seriously again. So, you know, which is very kind of him, you know, because he's, you know, I mean, but I mean, what was particularly good is when we got the uncorrected proofs, we got the white label copy of it. And I tweeted the cover of it, on which Neil's blurb is, I think, bigger than my name. and I immediately tweeted that. Immediately Twitter basically was like, Gaiman says what? You know. So yeah, Neil's been in that. The trouble is, it did occur to me the other day, it's raised an impossible bar for who I get to do the cover blurb for book 2. I mean, who is that? I mean, you know, it's like, short of getting a spirit message from Douglas, there is literally no higher endorsement for book 2. And I don't know if I'm going to get Neil to do it again. What's that? I could have a word with Terry. But the thing is, I get on very well with Rob, who's Terry's assistant. But I wouldn't want to impose upon Terry. But yeah, I could.
But it's just one line. What Neil said.
Yeah, what yes, what Neil said, Terry. Yeah, well, this is it, you know, because it's. I mean, I'll admit that there are, you know, I mean, there are elements of Douglas in this. It's a very different kind of book to Douglas. I mean, it's in many respects, it's a far more kind of a straightforward linear narrative than Douglas. I mean, the Hitchhiker's books are sort of weird kind of rambling stream of conscious satire that kind of operate within a sci-fi framework. You know what I mean? This is an altogether more straightforward kind of science fiction story. But I'll admit that, you know, Douglas was never far from my mind when I was writing it. When you write about the legendary planet Gagra, same Gagra orbiting the giant red star Thum, then Douglas is in the room with you. You know what I mean? There's a weapon in the second book called a phrastic jar and a blast tube. I'm sorry, that's a Douglas word. It's just like that. But you spot that all the time. I spot those. I think Russell T in particular does. Raxacoricophalopatorius is definitely there. The one in particular was that thing that evil thing in the ceiling in the Simon Pegg episode was called the Grand Jagrafest of the Hadrajasic. The Grand Jagrafest of the Holy Hadrajasic Maxarodophyte. The word Hadrajasic is a Douglas word. Yes. It just is. Hadrajasic. That's a Douglas word. It really is. You know, that's Milk Model 6. That's Cacophone Kappa. That's the Belceribon people. You know, Douglas was great at sci-fi words. You know, and there's a couple of Douglas words in here, definitely. You know, but you know, but you're absolutely right that it's in much the same way that if you ever try to do populist sci-fi on British TV, it's going to get compared to who? If you try and do funny sci-fi, it's going to get compared to Douglas. But then if you try to do funny high fantasy, it's going to get compared to Terry. You know what I mean? Certain people are just, and if you ever try and do straight high fantasy, it's going to get compared to Tolkien. Yeah, certain people are the touchstone to certain genres. You know what I mean? In much the same way, if you ever try to do bleak, vaguely metaphorical kids fiction, it's going to be compared to Roald Dahl. You know, so. Which is the other person you're compared to. What's that? Everything is shorthand for everything else. You know what I mean? It's everything. If you like, you're gonna love. You know what I mean? That's just, you know,
it's Amazon recommends.
Yes.
Well, hopefully it should be a bit rangier now than it's been for a couple of years. There's been this weird thing in much the same way that, like I say, American TV sci-fi in particular can't seem to make anything more than one show at any given time. It's almost like the fantasy books can only market one kind of book at any given time. And I think we're getting a bit away from that. I think it's getting a bit rangier, because I do remember a couple of years ago, you know, Neil's trying to get this All Hallows Read thing going. They're trying to institute as a tradition the idea of buying books, particularly scary books, for each other at Halloween. Well, I was on the road a few years ago, and my roadie Rob, his birthday is actually Halloween, so I was going to get him one. And I think we were in Harrogate or somewhere. And I went into Waterston and went to the horror section. The horror section of Harrogate Waterston basically consisted of Stephanie Meyer and knockoffs thereof.
Oh dear.
It was basically an entire horny vampire show. Yes. Literally, the horror section was just horny vampires. That's all it was. It was like shelves upon shelves upon shelves of horny vampires, you know. And it was Stephanie, it was Charlene Harris, and it was basically, you know, reams and knockoffs of one or the other or both.
How much do we ask you to do a turkey book if we've heard about this?
What's this? Where you get a bad book and read bits.
The absolute dross of crap for sci-fi.
Right.
And I was going to read a bit of Stephanie. How much do we pay for me not to read it?
I think it was Turner.
Just not to read on his blog.
I don't particularly have a problem with Stephanie, although I've never read it and I haven't even seen the movies. I don't particularly have a problem with that. The trouble is you just get this thing now where, I mean, the funniest one, you know, slightly off topic, the funniest one was this time last year, 50 Shades. Yeah. If you went into Smith's, they basically had the 50 Shades knockoff wing. Half the shop was dirty stories with black and white photos on the cover. Literally, half the shop was dirty stories with black and white photos. And they're all written by blokes. They're all written by blokes with one hand. In I would hazard about 45 minutes flat.
I read about 2 chapters and fell asleep.
Well, then,
just absolutely. I've had far better.
I've not read it, but I like that theory that it's solely responsible for a massive uptake in Kindles.
Yes.
Because you can read it in public without people noticing what you read. See, that's just one.
I detest about being stuck on the Northern Line, and I'd like to get my own book out, but I'm here like this, and all I can read is someone else's Kindle.
50 Shades.
Yeah, it was murder.
Whatever. But the weirdly, I was talking about this yesterday with a comedian panel by Mark Olbert. We think. There's an idea I'm going to put to Galance, which is the idea that with either you should have some way of being able to buy the hard copy and the download for some kind of deal. Because a lot of record companies are doing that now, and movie companies are doing this now, where if you buy the DVD, you also get the iTunes download code. Or, you know, because that way, you've already bought the DVD, so here, have it on your iPhone as well. You know what I mean? And yeah, it's absolutely no brainer. And I'm going to put that to Galance, because Galance actually, one of the things that Galance do like doing is that, because the big question in the publishing industry right now is the internet going to completely fuck the book industry the way it completely fucked the record industry, or did the record industry make all the mistakes already? Because the record industry made every mistake they could possibly make. People say, oh, the music industry is bugging. Oh, the music industry is fine, the record industry is bugging. And that's the big question in publishing right now, is it going to do it to books the way it did it to records, or did the record industry make enough mistakes for the book industry to learn it from and dodge most of the big bullets?
More people are going to go through Kindle anyway, particularly the smaller publishers.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, yes, hello.
I certainly read something yesterday that some speculation in the independents that publishers now going to look for people who have already made some money through self-publishing.
Well, you're bound to. I mean, why wouldn't you? But by the same token, the thing about self-publishing, as is much this way with like MySpace, is that it's become this great welter of crap.
Yeah.
Basically, everybody thinks they should write. Everybody thinks they can write a book now. And at any given time, about 95% of them are wrong, or at least they're wrong so far. You know what I mean? To a certain extent, the first thing you write shouldn't necessarily be held upon. You know what I mean? Your first attempt shouldn't necessarily be presented as the done deal. I mean, yeah. What's happening now? You've got Amanda Hawkins made $500,000. Therefore, self-publishing is the future of books. Whereas 8 years ago, it was like, the Arctic Monkeys got soul level MySpace, therefore MySpace is the future of rock and roll. MySpace lasted about another 2 years. You know what I mean? I've still got a MySpace page. I haven't been there since about 2008. You know, what you get, yeah, hello.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Bain Publishing, they have a library of free books.
Yeah.
You can just download.
Yeah.
And you can sign up for a monthly newsletter, and that gives you 4 books.
Yeah.
For like $18.
Yeah.
And they're very into selling both physical books and e-books.
Yeah. Well,
and they've gone that way, but yet again, the music industry and the film industry, it's all, oh my God, the pirates are coming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, there's no doubt that, you know, piracy in a weird way drives innovation, although it's not always great innovation. I mean, the main reason that everybody's making movies in 3D again for the past 5 years is because we're going to piracy. It's nothing to do with 3D movies being better, it's just they're harder to pirate. That, you know, if you download it and watch it on your iMac, you're somehow not getting the whole thing. That's the idea. They're just trying to. It's the same way that, you know, all these rock bands who thought they'd never have to play live again are all touring. It's because it's the one thing you can't download. It's the experience of actually being in the room while they're playing. It's the one thing you can't pirate.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is, like I say, there's been this vast welter of self-published books at any given time. I mean, let's be honest. 90% of professionally published books are shite. So 99.999% of self-published books are going to be. You know what I mean? Because there's no filter, there's no editor, there's no kind of selection. So it's yes, they will be out there. But if anything, it's going to be even harder for them to make money. It's because, you know, I suppose you'll get the sort of the word of mouth thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if somebody is already selling copies of books, having, you know, written the thing up on the iMac and bunged it up on iBooks and is now making, then obviously publishers are going to be interested in getting in touch with it in much the same way that if you put up a Bandcamp site and get like 2 million downloads a year, record companies are going to be after you. It's exactly the same principle. The only thing is, 2 questions, is one, how are people necessarily going to figure out who these people are? How are people going to figure out who the success stories are? And secondly, are those people going to give a shit? If you're already making, you know, $500,000 a year selling book and iBooks, why the hell are you going to sign up to HarperCollins? We're just going to end up taking 80% of your money away from you, when evidently you've apparently you've bypassed them. You know, that's going to be the question. But I mean, I do know that Gallants like to be sort of in the forefront of this. I mean, one of the things they're doing is they started the Gallants Geeks, which is their online sort of fan club thing almost. And I do know that they you know, Elite, the 80s text-based adventure game. When that was big in the 80s, Gallants published a bunch of books set in the Elite universe. Now there's a guy who's got a Kickstarter going because he's got the rights to Elite and wants to relaunch it as a full-on console game. Basically kind of a slightly less sociopathic Grand Theft Auto in space. It's still going to be the same kind of idea, zipping about the galaxy in your little spaceship, buying and selling stuff and getting into scrapes. But it's going to be actually a sort of a full console game thing rather than just lines of text on the screen. And Gallants approached him with a view to doing books set in the Eliteverse again, you know, a whole new bunch of books set in the Eliteverse. But what they did is, rather than buy the rights off him, they bunged a few grand into his Kickstarter. So, you know, they actually made it more likely that they'll get, so that's the kind of thing they'll do. So I'm definitely going to put this to them, because this is the kind of thing that I think they would like to be seen. You know, if you buy the hard book, then the hard book will also give you the download code to get it on your Kindle, or kind of vice versa. If you buy the Kindle, then we'll email you a voucher you can print off and take to Waterstones and get the hard copy for $5, or something like that. You know what I mean? Because I am, he's regenerated. I'm assuming, oh God, does that mean you're going to be Colin in about half an hour? Shades on, everybody, shades on. The coat is coming. If any one thing screwed up Doctor Who in the 80s, it was Colin's fucking coat. That coat is the one worst thing that happened to British science fiction, is that bloody coat. Because the thing is, I mean, I'm of a vintage that I can remember Doctor Who being, you know, put on hiatus or like postponed or whatever you call it, whatever happened to it in 85, 86. And I remember being as irate as everybody else at the time. But I also remember, well, it's 10 years ago now, UK Gold. This is something I like to point out to Doctor Who fans, for some reason having a bit of a whinge about what may or may not be happening in the 50th anniversary. Look, the 40th anniversary, we've got a repeats weekend on UK Gold. Right? Not even on the BBC, we've got a repeats weekend on UK Gold. Suck it up. Whatever we're getting now is better than that. But I remember one of the things they showed at the repeats weekend in UK Gold was Two Doctors, which is the story that was on when the hiatus was announced. And I was looking at Two Doctors going, yeah, I'd have cancelled this. This is terrible. It's terrible. It's appalling. And I think one of the things is, you watch over the course of Colin's, particularly that first season, Colin, the standard of acting from the visiting cast goes through the floor. Everybody, all the supporting characters, the visiting, you know, guest actors, suddenly start acting like they're in a bloody pantomime. All the supporting performances just get worse. You know, sometimes it doesn't matter. Okay, Nabila still, that works. You know what I mean? But even the people who are meant to be human beings suddenly start cranking it up, and everybody's acting like this. And now, what the fuck is going on? I think literally they're trying to drown out the coat. Because the thing is, you turn up to do an acting job and you think, right, okay, I know I'm going to play this, I'm going to play this a bit closer method, or I'm going to play this a bit more theatrical. And then you get there and the leading man is basically dressed as Ronald bloody McDonald. And you're like, oh, okay. All right, so this is just, and they just don't take it seriously. No, the visiting cast just don't take the show seriously for about 2 or 3 years, and I think that was part of the problem. I genuinely, because I know, I wrote a song about this, the Now Show, about a year ago. I go into bat for Colin every now and again. I think Colin actually was a great choice, and if Colin had been allowed to play it the way he wanted to play it, that would have been very interesting. Because Colin basically played blustering sociopaths. You look for his entire career, he plays blustering sociopaths. I mean, you know, he was the JR character in The Brothers. You know, he was a he was assassin in Blake 7, you know what I mean? You know, Colin basically played blustering sociopaths. And if that was certainly, if you look at him in Twin Dilemma, that's the direction he wants to take it in. He was, you know, particularly coming out of Peter as just like this sort of long-suffering sweetheart. And sort of the meekest of all the Doctors. The idea this bombastic sociopath would have been, but it's just, once you put him in that coat, he's got nowhere else to go. He's got nowhere else to go. So I think if one thing buggered the Doctor Who in the 80s, it was that coat. That and the fact I'm not sure it ever entirely got over Tom leaving.
No.
I'm not sure it ever, I think in retrospect, for all that I grew up with Tom and loved Tom, and he was my Doctor, he did stay too long. Yeah. Neither he nor it ever really truly recovered from it leaving. And I think that's why David played it right. He could have maybe got one more year at it, but I think David, because David was going to become Tom. David was going to become this generation's Tom. And he played it right, that basically, because, you know, when Tom left, I was 11 and I'd never really seen anybody else be the Doctor. You know, I mean, I kind of got into it just in his first season. I had dim memories of John. But, you know, I was 11, I've been watching the show for 7 years, and I'd only ever really seen the one Doctor. You know, and I don't know if it ever truly recovered from Tom leaving. I think you cast a massive, even now, when people cosplay as the Doctor, it's usually Tom. Particularly Americans. You know what I mean? When even now the show's been back for 8 years, and we're about to have our 4th Doctor of the second phase. When people say, what does Doctor Who wear? People say the scarf. You know, even now. You know, and he left like what 33 years ago. You know, so it's sorry. As in about March it will be. Yes.
And on that
Are we going to have to wrap it up?
Sadly have to say, before we get thrown at the hotel, for time reasons, Mitch has got stuff to sell and sign.
Yeah.
So
I've got my last album and I've got my book. I'm probably going to be doing a turn after dinner, so I might well be flogging the record after that. But in the meantime, I'm going to know the book at the end of the day.